Hey guys, tonight we begin in the damp, sticky breath of early morning fog. You stand ankle deep in churned up earth, the kind that sucks your boots off if you pause too long. All around you, a ragtag bunch of peasants and laborers grunt and groan, shovels scraping against stone, as you eyeball the horizon and try to remember if ditches are supposed to be straight or just ditch-shaped. Welcome to the first stage of castle building, digging a giant hole for reasons no one quite agrees on. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wipe your brow with a crusty sleeve, already regretting today's decision to be anywhere near construction. The site is a mess of half-tied strings, bent wooden stakes, and people arguing about whose side is level. Someone has brought a donkey with a cart full of gravel, which is useful, except the donkey has chosen this precise moment to lie down and contemplate the meaning of existence. That means, as usual, it's up to you. The trench needs to follow a rough rectangle, future home to the curtain walls, towers, gatehouses, and about 50 other parts you'll only understand after you've built them wrong. And right now, you're measuring it out with twine, shouting over the wind, and trying not to trip into what's basically a medieval swimming pool full of rocks and bad decisions. Why dig? Well, you need to set the foundation below frost level, or so they say. Historians still argue whether medieval builders understood permafrost depth or just kept digging until they hit something unpleasant. Either way, down you go. Your shovel strikes something hard. Not rock. Bone. Could be a sheep. Could be a knight. Could be last year's project. No time to dwell. You flick it aside, add a splash of holy water if you're superstitious, you are, and keep digging. The overseer walks by, pointing at nothing in particular, muttering about Roman methods. The Romans, he says, for the 6th time this hour, they did it better. Straighter. Deeper. With discipline. You wonder if that includes yelling at underpaid laborers. Probably yes. You try to dig a clean edge. But let's be real, this trench is more of a squiggle than a square. The string lines are sagging like overcooked noodles, and nobody's quite sure where the corners begin or end. Just dig where it's soft, says a guy who's definitely not in charge but acts like it. That logic seems to rule this entire job site. There's a general smell of wet wool, unwashed humanity, and overturned dirt, a kind of earthy soup with notes of sheep. Somewhere behind you, a child is selling pies that are mostly turnip and regret. You buy one anyway. You'll regret that too. Around mid-morning, the yelling reaches new heights. Two workers are in a fierce argument about whether the trench is 10 feet or 12. One of them pulls out a length of string, which he insists is a standard foot, even though it's clearly the length of his own foot, and he's been lying since last Thursday. You nod wisely and walk away before someone gets buried accidentally on purpose. The mud gets thicker the deeper you go, and it clings like guilt. Your boots now weigh as much as your ego. You develop a unique method of walking, one foot, squelch, then the other, repeat. The guy next to you is humming a song with only one note. You begin to question your life choices. Suddenly, there's cheering. Someone has struck water. Not the good kind. This is runoff from the hills, cold, brown, and full of mysterious floaty bits. Within minutes, the bottom of the trench is a shallow swamp. You watch a wheelbarrow slowly tilt sideways and disappear into the murk. A frog claims it as his new kingdom. No one stops him. Still, there's progress. By the end of the day, there's a trench-like shape carved into the earth. Uneven. Probably too narrow on the west side. Definitely deeper than needed on the north corner where someone tried to improvise. But it's done, kind of. You sit down on a flat stone, wipe mud from your face, and glance around. A flock of geese strolls by with an air of judgment. The sun lowers behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over your handiwork. It looks almost purposeful. A mason walks up, inspects the ditch with a groan, and says, "We'll need to dig it again tomorrow. A bit wider." You stare at him, blink slowly, and contemplate starting a small rebellion. Instead, you just sigh and nod. This is your life now. One trench at a time. You lean back, bones creaking like an old barn door. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings for supper. Stew. Probably turnips again. Maybe rat. Maybe turnip-flavored rat. Whatever. Anything tastes good when your arms feel like medieval jelly. And as the stars blink into the sky, you shuffle off the trench site, boots squelching, dreams already haunted by measurements, shouting, and the never-ending smell of damp earth. You've only just begun, and already, your back is writing protest songs. Welcome to castle building. Only about 20 years to go. You wake up sore. Not just sore, stiff, creaky, like someone replaced your joints with rusted hinges in the night. Every muscle protests as you roll off your straw mattress, brush the hay from your hair, and stumble outside toward the site where the foundation will soon be laid, or so they claim. Yesterday's trench still yawns like an open wound across the muddy earth, water pooled at the bottom, glinting under the early sun. Today's task, fill it with rocks. Not just any rocks, strong ones, flat ones, the kind that supposedly keep castles from sinking like bread in soup. No pressure. You join the first crew hauling chunks of limestone and granite into place, guided by a master mason who looks like he's never smiled once in his life. He taps at the stones with a wooden mallet, squints, then grunts approval, or doom. It's unclear which. The theory behind foundations is simple: make it strong, make it level, and make sure it doesn't crack in winter. In practice, you're lugging heavy boulders into a trench with no pulleys, no gloves, and no insurance. Your fingers are already bleeding, and it's only breakfast. There's a long-standing debate over whether medieval builders truly understood structural load distribution. Historians still argue whether they followed principles passed down from Roman engineers or just trusted in divine intervention and extra mortar. Judging by today's leadership, you're leaning toward the latter. The rocks come from nearby, riverbeds, fields, even the occasional ruined temple, don't ask. One man proudly reveals a piece of carved stone with a saint's face still etched on it. He places it face down in the mud. For luck, he says. The work is brutal. You squat, lift, place. Again. And again. And again. Your back becomes a living question mark. Someone invents a chant to pass the time: one stone, one groan. Catchy. Also painfully accurate. As you arrange the rocks, the overseer lectures about hydraulic compaction, a term he likely doesn't understand but enjoys shouting. He insists you tamp down the earth between layers. You use a thick log for pounding, rhythmic, exhausting, satisfying in the same way punching a wall might be. Lunch comes. Barley bread and onions. The good stuff. You sit beside a half-finished trench wall, sweat soaking your tunic, legs caked in dirt. A chicken pecks at your toes like you owe it money. You ignore it. It's not the weirdest part of your day. A new problem arises mid-afternoon: the north corner is sinking. Too much clay in the soil. Waterlogged. Your stonework from the morning is already leaning slightly, like a sleepy drunk. A heated debate ensues: should they tear it out and start again, or just shim it with gravel and hope for the best? Naturally, they choose gravel. It's the medieval way. You watch as a dozen workers pour cart after cart of loose stones into the trench, leveling it with their feet, like stomping grapes but with none of the fun and all the weight. You help drag a massive slab into place, grunting as it tilts precariously toward your shin. A mason casually stops it with a chisel and a prayer. Close call. Evening descends. You've placed dozens of stones, some so large they needed 5 people and a dangerously wobbly sled to move. The trench now resembles a jigsaw puzzle assembled by tired people under duress. It might hold. It might not. You'll find out during the first storm. As you sweep the final layer of gravel over the foundation, a young apprentice trips and falls face first into a pile of lime dust. He sits up, eyes wide, face ghostly white. The masons cheer. "You're one of us now," someone yells. He sneezes violently. You decide not to laugh too hard. Lime in the eyes is no joke. Medieval OSHA is not a thing. There's a quiet moment near sunset. You sit on a low wall of fitted stone, hands raw, heart thudding steadily. In the golden light, the foundation glows, a patchwork of effort, sweat, and questionable geometry. For the first time, it almost feels real. Like this castle might exist someday. Like it might stand. Then a goat wanders across the site and knocks a carefully placed stone askew. Everyone groans in unison. "Tie the goats up," someone shouts, as if that's ever worked. Before you leave for the evening, the master mason does a final walk-around. He gestures approvingly at the south trench, your trench, and makes a rare, grumbly compliment, "Not terrible." High praise. You'll treasure that forever. Back at the work camp, someone has started a bonfire. You eat more stew. This time it's slightly better, more carrot, less bone. The gossip tonight is about a nearby village where a foundation collapsed last winter. Buried 3 pigs in a haystack. Everyone nods gravely, then changes the subject. You fall asleep that night with the shape of stones burned into your retinas, your hands curled instinctively like they're still gripping rubble. Your dreams are full of collapsing trenches, goat hooves, and endlessly falling rocks. Still, the foundation's begun. The castle is rising, slowly, painfully, but rising. 1 stone at a time. Dawn again. Your fingers are swollen sausages and your thighs ache like they were personally insulted by gravity. But there's no time to wallow. Today, you're off to the quarry. You knew this would happen eventually. Every castle needs thousands upon thousands of stones, more than the local field or fallen church can provide. So now you find yourself trudging along a muddy road with a team of men, a cart, and an ox named something deeply uninspiring, like Gert. The quarry lies 2 miles away. Not far by modern standards, but in medieval boots, every step feels like penance. The road curves through forest and slope, the air thick with the scent of damp moss and cow sweat. And at the end, a sun-bleached cliff face, half-carved, chipped by generations of masons hacking at it like angry termites. This is your kingdom today, the stone pit. You arrive as men are already at work. Hammers ring against chisels, dust swirls, and someone yells for more rope. The quarry master, a barrel of a man with a beard like a cursed shrub, points you toward the limestone seam. "Clean lines," he bellows. "If you chip it wrong, it's firewood." Which makes no sense, but no one corrects him. Your job? Help dislodge giant blocks using iron wedges, wooden mallets, and patience. The process is surprisingly elegant. First, score the face of the stone with chisel lines. Then, drive in dry wooden wedges. Finally, this is the magic bit, you soak the wedges with water. As the wood expands, the rock splits. Slowly. Reluctantly. Like a teenager doing chores. Historians still argue whether this technique came from the Egyptians, Romans, or was simply figured out by very patient people who hated walking uphill. Either way, it works. Mostly. One worker swears by adding beer to the water. Stone comes out smoother, he insists. You try it. The only thing that gets smoother is his singing. The rock doesn't budge. Still, spirits are high. You hum along. Oxen wait nearby, harnessed to sleds, snorting with disapproval. You load up your first block, a chunky, stubborn cube the size of a dinner table, and together, with 10 men and Gert doing half the work, you start the slow roll back to the castle site. Here's where it gets fun. The wheels aren't wheels. They're roundish slices of tree trunk, lashed in place with rope and hope. The mud is deep. The incline is shallow but unending. Every few feet, the sled catches on a root or a rock or absolutely nothing, and you all have to grunt and push like your lives depend on it. Which, to be fair, they kind of do. Falling behind means losing rations. Or worse, getting stuck on trench duty again. Halfway through the return, it starts to rain. Not hard. Just enough to turn everything into treacle. The cart nearly slides sideways, Gert makes a noise like a dying trumpet, and one man falls face first into the mud. When he gets up, he claims to have seen a saint. No one argues. Mud vision is a known hazard. You pause at a stream to rest and drink. The water's cold and clean. For now. A boy upstream is rinsing his feet in it, so you drink fast and don't think about it too hard. By late afternoon, you're back at the site. The stone makes a satisfying thump as it joins the growing stack beside the wall. More blocks arrive, each bearing strange marks, some with old carvings, one with a fossil. A mason eyes that one for the chapel. It's divine, he whispers, though it looks like a squished snail. You help unload, stacking the stone in rough order by size, color, and mysterious stain. There's no real system, but everyone claims there is. The wall will know, someone says ominously. The day ends with your tunic stiff from dried mud and your hands bruised from mallets. You smell like lime dust and old socks. But the site is changing. Where yesterday there was only dirt and sweat, now there's material, mountains of it. Stone, glorious stone. Back at camp, you compare blisters and tall tales with the others. One man claims to have found a Roman coin in a boulder. Another insists he saw an ox speak Latin. Standard quarry stories. Dinner is lentils and leek broth, and for once, it's hot and not entirely awful. You eat with both hands, then stretch out near the fire, bones creaking like a siege tower. You dream of rolling stones uphill, endlessly, like that myth about the guy with the boulder, only in your dream, the boulder talks and insults your haircut. Typical. Tomorrow, you'll return to stack those stones into something meaningful. But tonight, you sleep with the sound of chisels still echoing in your ears, and the faint scent of limestone dust drifting through your nose. The morning begins with coughing. Not from illness, well, not entirely, but from the fine white cloud of lime dust that hangs over the worksite like a cursed mist. You squint through the haze and rub your eyes, which is a mistake because your hands are also covered in lime dust. Now your eyes sting, your throat burns, and the sun hasn't even cleared the treetops. Welcome to Mortar Day. Mortar, the magical glue that holds stone together, is made from a few humble ingredients: lime, sand, water, and a little wishful thinking. It sounds simple. It isn't. It requires precision, timing, and just the right amount of argument over whether the sand should come from the river or the pit. Your first task is hauling sacks of lime, powdered, potent, and allegedly capable of melting flesh if you're not careful. One mason gleefully tells the story of a guy who tripped face first into a lime barrel. Looked like a ghost for a week, he says. You decide to keep your distance from the barrels and avoid any more face first tripping. Historians still argue whether medieval builders consistently followed correct mixing ratios or just dumped things into the trough until it looked about right. Judging by today's process, it's definitely the second option. The master mason gestures vaguely. 2 shovels of lime, 1 sand, some water. Stir. Taste if curious. You're not. You use a wooden hoe to mix the heap of ingredients in a shallow pit. It's heavy, sticky work. The lime sizzles faintly when the water hits, almost alive, like it's deciding whether to become mortar or mischief. You stir and fold, until the mix is the consistency of cold porridge and the color of week-old milk. A laborer near you mutters about adding egg whites. Makes it set harder, he claims. Another swears by goat urine. Yet another insists his uncle once mixed a batch using nothing but beer and angry thoughts. You don't know who to believe, so you just keep stirring and pretend not to hear the part about chicken bones. Finally, the mortar is ready. It's loaded into wooden buckets, heavy and sloshing, then carried, by you, naturally, up ladders to the stonemasons working on the first layer of wall. The buckets leak. Your arms shake. One trip up the ladder and you already feel like you've aged 10 years. The masons work with surprising grace. They trowel the mortar onto the stones, press them together with the same concentration as monks copying holy texts, and then tap gently to settle. You try not to spill the next bucket on anyone's head, though one unfortunate apprentice gets a full dose on his back and walks around for an hour looking like a tragic pudding. Mortar isn't just glue, it's a science. If it's too wet, the stones shift. Too dry, and it crumbles like regret. The masons murmur about humidity, air temperature, and the phases of the moon. One man even sticks a finger in and nods solemnly. It's ready, he says, as if divining the future from gray goo. You're sent to mix a second batch. By now the wind has picked up, swirling lime dust into little devils that sting your skin. You wrap a rag around your face, pirate style, and keep shoveling. The rhythm becomes familiar: scoop, dump, splash, stir. Occasionally, someone sneezes explosively, sending mortar flying. Lunch is short, barley again, with a suspicious turnip, and then back to the wall. The first few feet of stone now stand in solemn silence, mortar squishing from the joints like frosting. You help refill gaps, smooth edges, and carve tiny initials into a hidden corner, not that anyone will ever find them. Suddenly, disaster. A loud crack echoes across the site. One corner of the wall shifts. A stone slides an inch out of alignment. Everyone freezes. The master mason roars like a wounded boar. You're told to fetch more buckets. Fast. The next hour is frantic. Mortar is reapplied. Stones are lifted and reset. Wooden braces are hammered into place to hold the wall while it cures. Sweat pours from every face. For a moment, it feels like the whole thing might collapse. But it doesn't. Somehow, the wall holds. The mortar begins to stiffen. The crisis passes. The masons mutter prayers and wipe their tools clean. You sit down, dizzy, legs trembling. You've survived your first real building scare. Evening arrives on the back of a cool breeze. You watch as the final stones of the day are laid, mortar smoothed lovingly into every seam. The wall is still low, barely chest height, but it's real. Solid. A promise of something greater. You help clean the tools in a barrel of cold water, hands raw and red. The lime has eaten through part of your tunic sleeve. A badge of honor, or poor laundry skills? Hard to say. Back at camp, someone is telling a story about a mason who accidentally mixed mortar with ash from a cremated saint. The wall never crumbled, but everyone who lived in the tower went bald. You nod politely and eat your stew, now used to the blend of superstition and practicality that rules this world. You fall asleep to the smell of dust and stone, dreaming of endless white buckets, dripping goo, and walls that whisper secrets while they set. The wall is rising. Only a few feet high, yes, but enough that you have to squint up now instead of down. Enough that the stones seem to cast actual shadows across the worksite, and enough that a new kind of labor begins, the never-ending, back-breaking task of hauling, lifting, and placing more and more rock to raise the curtain wall, one uneven layer at a time. Your job. Haul. Bucket after bucket of mortar, sled after sled of stone. You now measure progress in how many blisters you've acquired and how many curses you've invented for the splintered wheelbarrow that keeps losing a spoke. But there's something mesmerizing about it. As the layers climb, you start to sense the rhythm, the steady knock of chisels, the slap of mortar, the creak of wooden scaffolds as men move up inch by inch. You're no longer building nothing. You're building walls. Real ones. Walls people will stare at for centuries, maybe. Or at least until the next siege. The curtain wall, that outer shell of the castle, is supposed to do a lot: keep enemies out, support towers, impress the neighbors. So it needs to be thick, tall, and almost comically overbuilt. The current plan: 10 feet thick at the base. 30 feet tall, eventually. You're halfway to knee height. Someone whistles from above. It's the master mason, inspecting the alignment with his prized plumb line, a string with a rock tied to the end. Too wide by a thumb, he bellows. Start again. You look at the wall. You look at your fingers. You consider whether a thumb is really a reliable unit of measurement. Historians still argue whether medieval masons worked from formal blueprints or just improvised using wooden stakes, twine, and generational guesswork. Today it's all guesswork. The stakes are leaning. The twine is tangled. The measuring rod has gone missing, again. You suspect the ox ate it. You're given a mason's trowel and asked to help lay a row. Big mistake. The stone is heavier than it looks. You smear mortar like jam on toast, try to center the block, and lower it with shaking arms. It lands slightly crooked. You try to fix it. You make it worse. A senior mason strolls by, eyes it, says nothing, and silently shifts it a centimeter. It's perfect. You pretend you helped. By midday, the wall is waist-high in places. A new problem emerges: lifting stones that high with no crane. Enter the medieval scaffold. Long wooden beams lashed together with rope, braced by diagonal supports, and squeaking ominously under the weight of men, buckets, and the occasional confused goat. You ascend it cautiously, heart-thumping, gripping the handrails, which are more decorative than functional, and hoist your first bucket of mortar to the upper tier. Up here, everything sways. The breeze is stronger. The view is breathtaking, assuming you're not too busy trying to balance a 60-pound stone on a plank narrower than your foot. One wrong step, and it's you who's falling, not the bucket. You help lay another course of stone, and this time it goes better. You can feel the logic of the wall now, how each layer overlaps the one below, how mortar settles into the tiniest cracks, how the pressure distributes itself when the blocks are aligned just so. It's weirdly beautiful. It's also extremely painful. Down below, a team of laborers are still fetching materials, carting gravel, mixing mortar, and yelling about whether a certain stone belongs on the north or west face. You suspect the stone doesn't care. It just wants to sit still and be left alone. You pause for a water break. A mason beside you points to a particular section of the rising wall and says, "That'll be the bit the archers use." You glance at the 1-foot gap. "Bit small," you say. He shrugs. "They're not meant to be comfortable. Just deadly." Later that afternoon, someone drops a chisel from the top of the scaffold. It bounces, clangs, misses a man's head by inches, and embeds itself in a soft patch of dirt. Everyone freezes. Then someone shouts, "It's good luck," and the moment passes. A fringe superstition, apparently: falling tools are blessings. Sure. Why not? By now your muscles are jelly, your arms twitch when you try to lift anything, and your hands are starting to form calluses big enough to qualify as medieval armor. But the wall is unmistakably growing, and so is your strange sense of pride. You're part of it now. You can see it in the lines of stone, in the way the structure leans ever so slightly forward to compensate for future sagging, in the layers of mortar that hold together more than just rock. Late in the day, a dispute breaks out. A young mason insists the wall should curve slightly at the southeast corner. The master mason disagrees, claiming the Lord wants a clean, squared fortress. Voices rise. Someone brings up the Romans again. Someone else mentions that the southeast corner is haunted. Eventually, they compromise by doing nothing until tomorrow. You descend the scaffold slowly, feeling every joint scream in protest. The sky turns orange as the sun sinks behind the hills, casting long shadows across the growing rampart. You stare at it, neck craned, and realize something wild. It looks like a castle. A baby castle, maybe. But still. That night, the fire at camp burns hotter than usual. Everyone's talking about how the curtain wall will eventually link all the towers, surround the keep, and turn this muddy patch into a fortress fit for a king, or at least a minor noble with delusions of grandeur. You fall asleep on your cot, the rhythm of stones settling and scaffolds creaking still echoing in your bones, dreaming of high walls, hidden windows, and just once, not having to lift anything heavier than a spoon. The higher the wall rises, the more you find yourself suspended in midair, balancing on beams that groan under your weight and swaying platforms that look like they were built by someone with a grudge against right angles. Welcome to the glamorous world of scaffolds and splinters. Today's job starts with climbing, a lot of it. The curtain wall now stands taller than a man on horseback, and while that's great for defense, it's considerably less great for anyone who has to work on it. The scaffolding sprawls around the structure like a skeletal forest, poles lashed together with rope, platforms nailed into place by men who probably skipped geometry class. You climb cautiously, gripping beams smoothed by calloused hands and too many near misses. The ladder is made of rough branches, with steps that bend ominously. About halfway up, you remember that safety harnesses won't be invented for several hundred years. You pause, exhale, and keep climbing. The view from up here is something else. You can see the whole site, the horses munching near the stables, the glint of sun on unfinished stone, the smudges of tiny workers below moving like ants. Beyond that, fields stretch out in every direction, golden with grain, dotted with cottages, and somewhere in the far distance, a plume of smoke from a cooking fire. Idyllic, if you ignore the fact that your platform is wobbling like a poorly made pancake. Today's task: help extend the scaffold along the new section of wall. It's not just a working platform, it's a lifeline. Without it, the upper stones can't be laid, mortar can't be poured, and you'd be stuck with very short, very useless walls. You and 3 others are in charge of hauling timber, lifting it onto the platform, and hammering it into place. The beams are greenwood, heavy, wet, and occasionally alive with beetles. One man finds a spider the size of a plum inside a hollow branch. He lets it go, but not before naming it. That's Walter. He guards this side. A builder hands you a mallet and gestures to a thick peg. Drive it in. But not too hard. You ask why. He grins. You'll find out. You tap. The beam shifts. You tap again. It holds. Then, just as you turn away, snap. The beam shifts half an inch, sending a jolt through your legs and a nearby mason's entire lunch flying off the platform. You've learned something important: everything up here is temporary. Including your sense of balance. Historians still argue whether medieval scaffolds followed standard designs or were just patched together day by day. Judging by today's masterpiece, it's absolutely the latter. No 2 planks are the same length. Half the supports lean like they're afraid of heights. Someone has nailed a crucifix into one post, just in case. Reassuring. While you hammer pegs and drag beams, the stonework continues. The masons work fast, balancing like tightrope walkers, laying new courses of stone atop the growing wall. Mortar drips down the sides. Occasionally, a trowel gets dropped with a panicked shout of "heads," followed by laughter if no one dies. A bucket lands in a pile of hay and is never seen again. The work is methodical: stone, mortar, level, next. But everything takes twice as long up here. You carry tools carefully, stepping over gaps, ducking under ropes, trying not to smack someone in the face with a length of timber. You fail. Apologies are exchanged. The man offers you half his onion. Peace is restored. At one point, a noble visits. He's dressed in fur and frowns like he's allergic to manual labor. He points at the scaffold and says something about a more aesthetic angle. You all nod, pretending to understand what that means. Then he rides off, leaving behind the scent of perfume and disapproval. You eat lunch balanced on the edge of the platform, legs dangling over a 30-foot drop, chewing slowly while watching a bird try to nest in the unfinished arrow slit. You wonder if it'll make it. You wonder if you will. After lunch, disaster. A support beam, loosened by last night's wind, gives way beneath a cart of mortar. The platform dips. Men shout. Tools scatter. Someone nearly loses a boot, and someone else loses a bet about when this would finally happen. But miraculously, no one's hurt. You all reinforce the support, lash it tighter with hemp rope, and add an extra beam for good measure. And then, back to work. Because what else is there? As the sun arcs westward, your arms grow heavier. You've hammered, lifted, hauled, and sweated through every layer of your tunic. Your hands are raw, your shoulders scream, and your knees have decided to retire from public life. But the scaffold now stretches the entire length of the western wall. It's solid. It's high. And most importantly, it's still standing. You end the day hauling up one last bundle of timber, watching the sunset light blaze across the stone. The curtain wall looks taller now, realer. You can almost imagine sentries pacing along the top, banners fluttering, horns echoing. You also imagine falling off it and decide not to. Back at camp, someone's playing a lute badly. A group of workers drink ale from a shared jug, arguing about whether the new scaffold will survive the next rainstorm. You say nothing. You just stretch out on your cot and listen to the wood creak in your memory. In your dreams, you're walking a scaffold high above the clouds, hammer in hand, the wind howling like a beast. You're building something impossible. And it might just work. You start your day with a rock shaped like a question mark. It's meant to be part of an arch, one of the doorways leading into the inner courtyard, but somehow it's been chipped just wrong. Too narrow on one end, too lumpy on the other. You stare at it, tilt your head, flip it around. It still looks like punctuation. The master mason shrugs. We'll make it fit. Welcome to the chaos of arches, angles, and aggravation. Unlike the broad, blocky curtain walls, arches require finesse. Precision. Geometry, even. Not exactly the castle's strongest suit. This is where art meets engineering, and where your patience goes to die. You're working under a timber canopy today, surrounded by dusty chisels, wooden frames called centrings, and the endless clink of tools against stone. The centring is what keeps the arch from falling apart while it's being built, basically a skeleton made of timber, shaped like a doorway, wedged into place while stones are laid over it. The keystone, the one right in the middle at the top, has to be perfect. Naturally, you've been asked to help cut it. You're handed a chisel and a roundish lump of limestone. The mason explains that the sides must taper just so, the angle must be exact, and any error will collapse the entire arch. No pressure, he grins. Your first attempt is bad. Too much on one side. Not enough on the other. You chip it again. Now it's a trapezoid. Maybe a potato. The mason sighs and starts over with a new block. You go back to hauling stones shaped by people with steadier hands. Every arch is part of something: doorways, windows, gates. They curve upward with delicate tension, holding tons of stone in balance through sheer alignment. It's genuinely impressive, like balancing a stack of dishes using nothing but gravity and spite. Historians still argue how much math went into these designs. Some believe masons used geometric drawings scratched into plaster walls, others think they just copied what worked before and eyeballed the rest. Watching today's team argue over whether the curve is round enough using only their thumbs suggests the latter. The arch team includes a goat. Not by design, the goat just lives here now. It was brought in to eat weeds, but now it refuses to leave and seems emotionally attached to the scaffolding. You name it Lorenzo. Lorenzo likes to chew discarded rope and stand in precisely the worst place at the worst time. You help hoist wedge-shaped stones into place along one side of a half-built arch. They lean inward, resting on the wooden formwork. You smear mortar into the joints, tap the stone lightly, and pray to at least 3 saints. The arch starts to take shape. There's a rhythm now: lift, set, tap, shift. Each stone curves slightly, teeth in a smile. And then comes the final piece, the keystone. It's larger, heavier, and sits right at the apex. Once it's in, everything else locks. You hold your breath as 2 masons lift it together. They place it. Tap it once. Twice. It slides in with a muffled thunk. The arch holds. Barely. Lorenzo bleats approvingly. With that one arch done, you move on to the next. This one's for a window on the 2nd floor. You climb up with a bundle of wedge stones on your back, passing masons muttering about light angles and decorative flourishes. This arch will be visible from the courtyard. That means it needs aesthetic integrity. You're not entirely sure what that means, but apparently it involves carving little flowers into the stone. An apprentice shows off a chisel pattern of a tulip. It looks like a squid. You compliment it anyway. After lunch, the wind picks up. That's bad news for anything high and delicate, including scaffolding, arches, and people standing near either. A dust storm whips across the site, and one of the wooden centering frames comes loose. You rush to help hammer it back in place before the arch collapses. A brief moment of panic follows. Everyone scrambles. The keystone wobbles. Someone drops a bucket of mortar onto the ground. But miraculously, the arch holds. You all cheer, then pretend not to care. You were never worried. Later, an old man who claims to have built chapels for bishops shows up to consult. He spends 20 minutes critiquing every angle, shakes his head slowly, and concludes, "It's fine." Then he leaves without explanation. You carve your initials into the underside of a stone that will eventually be sealed inside an arch forever. No one will ever see it, but you'll know it's there. That counts for something. By late afternoon, the arches begin to catch the light. Sunbeams curve through the empty frames, creating soft shadows on the stone. You step back and realize just how many arches now dot the wall, some narrow, some wide, all balanced in silent defiance of gravity. Dinner is quiet tonight. Everyone's tired in that full-body, bone-deep kind of way. But there's pride in the air too. Even the goat seems satisfied, gnawing on a lump of wood with purpose. You sleep with the image of a perfect keystone lodged in your mind, holding everything up, steady as the stars above the scaffold. You know something's different the moment you step on site. For one thing, you're heading inside, or what passes for inside, anyway. The walls are finally high enough to enclose a space, and the first real tower is under construction. Not just any tower, either. This one is the dungeon, the mighty stone heart of the future castle, where the Lord will sleep, hide during sieges, and presumably complain about drafty windows. It's taller than anything else on site and thicker than your patience. Today, you've been assigned to work deep within its base, helping build the lower chambers, which are essentially glorified dungeons. You step through a narrow entryway into the half-finished structure and instantly regret it. The air is cool, damp, and smells like something between wet wool and regret. You descend a winding stair, torch in hand, the walls slick with condensation. The interior is cavernous, echoey, and just slightly terrifying. If you dropped your hammer here, you'd probably never hear it hit bottom. The dungeon is where the most stone gets used per square foot. The walls at ground level are easily 12 feet thick, meant to withstand everything from battering rams to trebuchets to angry complaints from nobles. You help maneuver one of the enormous foundation blocks into place, 4 men, 1 goat, 2 ropes, and a lot of shouting. The space is a maze. There's a future kitchen down here, a future prison cell over there, maybe even a wine cellar if the Lord has priorities. The blueprints are vague. Actually, there are no blueprints. Just a lot of chalk marks on stone and a master mason muttering under his breath about that one tower in Normandy. Today, you're helping build the internal support columns. These squat, ugly things are made of roughly cut stone and will one day hold up the upper floors, if you don't mess it up. The mason hands you a line level, a square, and says, try not to lean it. Or we'll all die. You think he's joking. You really hope he's joking. As you lug stones into the shadowy interior, you pass a pile of rubble where someone carved a crude face into a leftover block. It grins at you, one eye larger than the other, tongue poking out. You smile back. Castle humor. And then, the smell. It hits you like a battering ram. Not just musty or dusty, but something foul and ancient. You follow your nose to a pile of rotting straw in one corner. Someone clearly used this unfinished basement as a temporary privy. Or maybe an actual privy. It's hard to tell. Either way, you cover it with a flagstone and vow never to mention it again. The dungeon build moves slowly. Everything is heavier in here. The air doesn't circulate. You start sweating within minutes, even though it's cold. The torches smoke constantly. One apprentice gets so dizzy he walks into a wall, then apologizes to it. You haul mortar down in buckets, one trip after another, navigating stairs so narrow they scrape your shoulders on both sides. At one point, a rat skitters across your boot. You pretend it didn't happen. Historians still argue whether donjons were always designed as strongholds or just evolved that way from earlier fortified manors. Either way, this one's definitely being built like it expects trouble. Every layer is overbuilt. Every doorway has a murder slot above it. One hallway even curves in such a way that attackers would have to enter single file, a feature someone calls friendly funneling. You write that down. It sounds polite, somehow. A noblewoman visits the site and asks where her private chambers will be. The master mason gestures vaguely upward and says, higher. She frowns and demands a fireplace. You wonder how many chimneys you'll end up carving. In the late afternoon, you help raise a temporary wooden hoist to lift materials into the upper levels. It's crude, just a winch and some rope, but it saves your back from total ruin. You test it by lifting a block of stone. It sways dangerously, knocks a tool bucket off the scaffold, and spins like a top before settling. Success. Sort of. The tower's upper walls are growing. You can hear the hammering above. You can see beams being laid for the next floor. But down here in the belly of the dungeon, it still feels like a cavern. Dark. Echoing. Mysterious. You finish the day placing the final stone of the southern interior column. The mason marks it with chalk. You pat it once, like a sleepy dog, and whisper, don't move. It stays put. You feel victorious. That night, you eat by candlelight, still smelling faintly of mold and rat fur. One of the masons swears he saw a ghost in the dungeon. Looked like a nun, he says. She told me to fix my posture. Everyone laughs. You pretend you're not just a little spooked. You dream of spiraling staircases that never end, cold torchlit rooms, and doorways that lead to nowhere. And in all of it, that strange carved face, smiling at you from a forgotten wall. You've hauled stones. You've mixed mortar. You've dangled from scaffolding like a human wind chime. But nothing prepares you for today's noble assignment, building the castle's privy system. Yes, the medieval toilet. Don't act surprised. Even lords and ladies need somewhere to go, and now it's your job to help figure out where that is, exactly, in a massive stone structure with no pipes, no pumps, and no shame. You start your morning in a corner of the dungeon that smells suspiciously fresh. A wooden sign reads, Privy Room, as if putting the word room next to it gives it dignity. It doesn't. What you find is a small stone recess, partially walled in, with a hole in the floor and a long chute carved into the outer face of the castle wall. Gravity will do the rest. Today's goal: install the garderobe chute and run a rudimentary drain to funnel the material down and out into a pit. It's all about flow, the master mason says seriously, pointing at the incline with a stick. Get the angle wrong, and it backs up. You make a silent vow to get the angle very, very right. You and two others begin by clearing a channel through the stone. It's cramped, unpleasant work. Chiseling out space for waste doesn't carry the glamour of archways or battlements, but it does have a certain urgency. Let's just say it's the one thing the Lord insisted be finished before winter. Historians still argue whether medieval privies were actually hygienic or just creative excuses for wall holes. Some castles even had multiple layers of toilets, one above the other. That seems efficient until you realize what happens when the top floor misses. Your chute's outlet will spill into a cesspit at the base of the tower, ideally one that drains into a nearby creek. Which, yes, is also where laundry happens. Medieval multitasking at its worst. As you chip away at the stone, the stench from the partially finished pit wafts upward. It's not from current use, thankfully, but from the composting straw someone added last week to start things early. You breathe through your mouth. It doesn't help. You take a break on a ledge near the outer wall, where the wind at least carries the smell away. A passing guard jokes that you'll soon be known as Sir Privy. You nod grimly. It's already happening. Back inside, a carpenter arrives to install the wooden seat, a thick plank with a cutout shaped like a squatty oval. He's decorated it with carved swirls and even added a lid, which seems ambitious. Gotta respect the buttocks of nobility, he explains, completely straight-faced. Meanwhile, in the kitchens, someone else is running a pipe, yes, an actual pipe, made from hollowed logs. It's supposed to carry wastewater away from the washing basin. You help wedge it into place with moss and pitch. Naturally, the pipe leaks. You plug it with a bit of cloth and hope no one notices until spring. As the day wears on, you move on to the drainage trenches. These are shallow ditches lined with stone that wind through the courtyard, intended to carry away rainwater, and anything else unfortunate enough to wash out of the garderobes. You dig with a wide, flat shovel, sweating under the sun, tracing the slope with a long stick and muttered prayers. A fellow worker points out that the ditch also runs right past the main entrance. You both pause, look at the map, then shrug. Good luck, visitors. Lunch is extra awkward today because the makeshift eating area is directly adjacent to the trench you're digging. There's a shared unspoken rule not to mention this. You eat your barley stew and pretend not to smell anything suspicious. After lunch, a local priest arrives to bless the privy room. Apparently, the Lord's wife insisted. It keeps away demons, the priest explains, splashing holy water across the chute. You slip a little on the wet stone and nearly become the first official casualty of the sewer system. You regain your balance with dignity. Sort of. Later, you help test the drainage. A barrel of water, only water, thankfully, is poured into the chute. You all race outside to see if it emerges at the correct outlet. It does. Mostly. It trickles, swirls, then gets briefly stuck on a sharp turn. The mason frowns. You chisel the edge down. Try again. Better. Progress. By late afternoon, the privy system is fully assembled. There's the upper garderobe, with its stone seat and blessed chute. There's the drainage trench, which snakes like a lazy eel across the courtyard. And there's the waste pit, now lined with stones and a few unlucky beetles. Is it elegant? Not quite. Is it functional? Probably. Will it flood during a heavy rain? Almost definitely. But it's done. As you pack up tools and wipe your hands on your already filthy tunic, you hear a small voice from behind you. One of the kitchen boys, wide-eyed and serious, asks, "Does it echo when you use it?" You stare at him. He stares back. You both nod in unison. It probably does. Dinner is mercifully served far from the worksite tonight. You sit near the fire, surrounded by people who now give you a little more space than usual. You don't blame them. You smell like success, and sewage. You fall asleep with the sound of trickling water in your ears, the faint memory of carved toilet seats in your mind, and the unshakable knowledge that every great castle has to answer one very humble question: where does it all go? The sun barely crests the horizon when you hear it, the unmistakable groan of timber being lifted, followed by a shouted, "Mind your heads," and then a resounding thud. Today is roof day, or, more accurately, begin the roof so it might finish next year day, and you've been volunteered for the carpentry crew. Lucky you. Raising the roof of a medieval castle is less dramatic finale, and more frustrating wood-based puzzle. You begin by helping unload giant beams from a creaky ox cart. They're straight-ish, long-ish, and still sticky with sap. Each one smells like pine, bark, and splinters, lots of splinters. You drag your first beam into place with 3 other workers and immediately get bark in your eye. A promising start. These beams will form the trusses, those upside-down V-shaped supports that will carry the entire roof structure. They're joined at the top with wooden pegs and bound with rope until the permanent joints are hammered in. You haul them into position atop the dungeon, one by one, using a wobbly pulley system that clearly hates you. Up on the rooftop, no, not like reindeer, the view is spectacular and terrifying. One misstep, and you'll learn the exact speed at which a person can bounce off scaffolding on the way down. You tread carefully. The carpenters are a different breed. Unlike the masons, who squint and grunt, these men hum. They joke. They carry long saws on their backs like sleepy warriors and argue constantly about whether a given notch is too shallow or artistically brave. One claims his grandfather invented a squareness stick. You let him have it. Your job. Hold, hammer, repeat. You slot tenons into mortises, hammer wooden pegs through holes, and gently tap the joints until the frame creaks like an old knee but holds. It's oddly satisfying, like assembling a giant, medieval IKEA set. Historians still argue whether trusses were pre-assembled on the ground and hoisted into place or built one stick at a time, in midair, like you're doing now. You now firmly believe it was the second option, mostly because you're doing it right now, and there's no sign of any pre-built anything. By mid-morning, a light breeze picks up. Not ideal when you're standing on a roof beam holding a support post taller than yourself. A carpenter named Hodge, whose beard seems structurally sounder than the scaffolding, grabs your belt as you wobble. "Wind's tricky," he says. "Got a cousin who flew clean off in Kent. Landed in a pigsty. Married the farmer's daughter." You nod. Not sure what part of the story is relevant, but you appreciate the concern. Back on the ground, smaller teams are shaping rafters and roof boards using broad axes and adzes. The scent of fresh cut wood hangs heavy. It's nice, actually. Comforting. Much better than the privy trenches. You help lift a completed truss section into place. The entire crew heaves it upward, balances it on both ends, and slowly eases it into the pre-cut joints atop the stone walls. It wobbles, creaks, then settles with a satisfying clunk. Everyone exhales. One carpenter wipes his forehead and mutters, "Only 10 more to go." Lunch is quick: bread, cheese, and whatever dried fruit someone traded for. You sit in the shadow of the rising roof frame, admiring the skeletal outline of future shelter. It looks like a ribcage from below, curved and looming. A big, wooden beast waiting to be skinned. After lunch, roof boards. These long, flat planks will run horizontally along the trusses, giving the roof its body. You help carry them up in bundles, stacking them awkwardly on your shoulder, praying not to lose balance. The boards are greenwood, still damp, so they creak and twist unpredictably. The carpenters argue about whether to use nails or pegs. Nails are expensive. Pegs split. Eventually, someone just starts hammering both and muttering prayers. At one point, a worker slips and drops a board, which glances off the scaffold and disappears into the moat. Well, the future moat. Right now, it's a muddy ditch with a goose in it. The goose is not pleased. As the afternoon wears on, the structure begins to look like an actual roof. You can imagine the tiles or shingles that will one day cover it, though that's still seasons away. For now, it's enough just to frame it out and hope the next storm doesn't undo your entire day's work. You take a moment near sunset, perched high on a crossbeam, to admire the view. The walls are nearly enclosed. The keep casts a long shadow over the field. A faint breeze rustles the dangling ropes in your hair. Everything smells like sawdust, sweat, and slow progress. Then someone shouts from below, "Timberworm." Apparently, the last shipment of beams has tiny boreholes, evidence of woodworms. Panic spreads briefly. A carpenter saws into one beam and finds a squirming little invader. Everyone groans. These creatures can hollow out a joist from the inside, leaving it ready to collapse at just the right moment. You're ordered to help remove and replace the compromised beam. It takes nearly an hour to lift out and fit in a new one, but by then, the sun is low and tools are being packed up. As you descend, legs trembling with every rung of the ladder, a carpenter claps you on the back. Not bad for a mason's assistant. You smile. You'll take it. Dinner is quiet tonight. The roof frame still stands in your mind, beams and joints and endless angles. You chew slowly, every limb buzzing with fatigue, every finger sore from hammering. You dream of rafters stretching to the stars, trusses groaning gently under the weight of moonlight, and the faint sound of someone in the distance shouting, "Not that beam, the other one." You wake to the unmistakable sound of frogs. Loud, wet, argumentative frogs. That's because today, you're digging a moat, or something that hopes to become one. Right now, it's more of a muddy trench with dreams of grandeur, half dug around the outer wall and occupied by water, worms, and a small community of judgmental amphibians. There's debate, loud, shovel in hand, sweat dripping down your back debate, about what the moat is actually for. Is it for defense? Drainage? Decoration? The answer is yes, no, and depends on who you ask. Your instructions are straightforward: dig the ditch wider, deeper, and somehow flatter all at once. You plant your spade into the wet soil, lean in, and immediately lose your boot. Welcome to the moat mystery. The ground here is soft and unstable, like someone spilled porridge across the landscape and called it terrain. Your first few scoops bring up black mud, worms, and the occasional shard of pottery. Someone suggests it might be Roman. Someone else uses it to plug a hole in the wheelbarrow. The ditch winds around the curtain wall in a rough oval, about 15 feet across, with the ambition to become 30. It already collects rainwater, and frogs. So many frogs. One of them hops into a noble's shoe yesterday and caused a diplomatic incident. The frog is fine. The shoe is not. You and 24 others start widening the moat using shovels, picks, and an ancient-looking tool called a scraper board, which is basically a plank nailed to a stick. It's great for spreading mud, which is only useful if you wanted everything covered in it. You didn't. Halfway through the morning, you stop to watch a cart full of gravel being tipped into the base of the moat. For drainage, the overseer says. So the water doesn't get too high. You look at the gray clouds above and the current puddle forming around your ankles. Sure, you mutter. Historians still argue whether medieval moats were always filled with water or sometimes left dry and spiked. Some served as sewage trenches, others as fish ponds. This one seems to be trying to do all three, and failing equally at each. You take a break on a pile of broken rocks and sip from a flask that tastes like cold tea in despair. A man beside you swears he saw a leech the size of a sausage. Another claims the moat will be filled with eels for added security. You try not to think about what it would be like to fall into an eel moat. Later, you're tasked with reinforcing the banks. The earth is too soft, so woven reed mats are staked in place to prevent landslides. It's slow work, staking, packing, praying. A lad named Oswin accidentally knocks half the mat into the water. It floats downstream toward a village. You all pretend not to notice. Near the gatehouse, masons are lining one section of the moat with stone. It's a prestige spot, the part visitors will see first. The stonework is neat, carefully mortared, and absolutely pointless in terms of defense. But it looks expensive, and that's enough. Then there's the moat bridge, currently just 2 logs laid side by side, wobbling with every step. The plan is to replace it with a stone drawbridge eventually. For now, you cross it holding your breath and walking like a nervous chicken. After lunch, turnip stew, again, a priest blesses the moat. Not joking. He walks the edge, sprinkles holy water, and mumbles something about protection against beasts of the deep. Everyone nods politely. One worker whispers, "I hope he means eels." By mid-afternoon, you're back to digging, sweat pouring, clothes soaked, every muscle muddy and tired. The ditch is slowly expanding. It curves now. It reflects the sky. It even smells better, sort of earthy instead of just damp. A noble's daughter visits the site and asks if the moat will have swans. You look up from your mud-caked boots, gesture to a frog biting your toe, and say, "Eventually." She leaves unimpressed. As you're shoveling, your spade strikes something hard. Everyone freezes. You dig carefully and reveal a skeleton. Not human, just a cow. But it's enough to start rumors. A battle, someone suggests. A sacrifice, offers another. Lunch, says a third. You quietly cover it and keep digging. You finish the day hauling another load of mud out of the moat and dumping it on what will eventually be the garden. Probably. It's hard to keep track. As you rinse your hands in the stream, the frogs sing louder. One lands on your shoulder and stares at you with the vacant wisdom of someone who's never carried gravel in their life. Back at camp, everyone eats in silence, too tired to talk. You peel off your boots, wring out your tunic, and watch the firelight dance on the nearby puddles. The moon reflects faintly in the water. You dream of endless ditches. Water that whispers. Frogs that ask deep philosophical questions. And in the center of it all, a castle surrounded by a moat that, against all odds, might someday be more than a trench full of swampy optimism. You step through the arched doorway and into a space that smells like dust, lime, and freshly carved oak. The stone walls around you are bare but proud, solid, smooth, and echoing like a cathedral. This is the castle's great hall, and today, for once, you're not here to stack stones or dig trenches. You're here to furnish. Finally, something that sounds, well, marginally less miserable. The Great Hall is the social center of the castle, the banquet venue, throne room, courtroom, and rainy day gossip hub. It's a single massive chamber, with high ceilings and tall, narrow windows that cast long stripes of light across the flagstone floor. At one end, a raised dais where the Lord's chair will sit. At the other, the remains of scaffolding and a small pile of discarded boots. Your first task, carry planks. You hoist one end of an enormous oak board, the kind meant for trestle tables, and help maneuver it through the wide entry. It takes 4 men and a lot of yelling. The carpenter guides it in like a ship docking in a narrow port. Gently. Gently. No, not into the wall. The tables are simple, long, heavy, and almost comically overbuilt. The benches are no better. You spend an hour sawing pegs, fitting joints, and tapping wedges into place while your knees creak like the castle gates. After that, you're handed a ladder and a chandelier. No, really. The chandelier is a crude metal hoop with candle holders. It's your job to help hoist it into place using a rope pulley, while someone else balances on a beam above to secure the hook. You try not to think about the distance to the floor. Or the fact that you're holding a giant, flammable object by a fraying rope. Once it's secure, someone lights a few of the candles. The effect is immediate, warm, flickering light that dances across stone and shadow, making the whole room feel strangely alive. And slightly smoky. Next comes the rushes, a medieval floor treatment that's part carpet, part air freshener, part compost. You help scatter bundles of dried reeds and herbs across the stone floor, the scent of lavender and rosemary fighting valiantly against the underlying notes of damp stone and sweaty laborers. A weaver's apprentice arrives with tapestries, still half-finished, which are immediately hung from iron hooks along the coldest walls. They show mythical beasts, hunting scenes, and, strangely, what looks like a turnip with wings. It's symbolic, she says. You don't ask. Historians still argue whether tapestries were mostly decorative or actually crucial for insulation. Judging by the temperature in here without them, you lean toward crucial. One side of the hall always seems 10 degrees colder than the other. You suspect ghosts. Or just bad architecture. Then comes the feasting gear, trenchers, flat bread used as plates, wooden bowls, pewter cups, and one very bent ladle. You help polish them with rough cloth until they sort of shine. One knight insists on a special chair with arms. You give him a stool with 2 legs and walk away before he notices. Near midday, the Lord himself visits. He enters with a dramatic sweep of cloak, surveys the nearly finished hall, and says, then he walks to the fireplace, newly installed, barely tested, and declares it a bit small. It's the size of a small chapel. No one dares to correct him. He also wants banners. You nod, and make a mental note to ask the textile workers if they can embroider a lion and a tree and a Latin motto by Tuesday. They'll love that. After lunch, the focus shifts to the dais, the raised platform where the high table will sit. You help lay down woven mats, adjust the chairs, no one agrees which should face which direction, and attempt to align the whole thing symmetrically beneath the chandelier. It's slightly off. You all pretend not to see it. One of the more eccentric servants begins auditioning trumpet echoes, blowing a horn from various points in the room to test acoustics. You applaud politely when he hits the right resonance. He bows. At one point, a small dog runs in, jumps on a bench, and promptly falls asleep. No one knows whose dog it is, but someone throws it a sausage and it stays. You name it Guster. Guster now lives in the Great Hall. As the sun begins to dip, the room truly comes alive. Candles flicker in the chandelier. The tapestries shift softly in the breeze. The long tables are set, more or less evenly. A soft murmur fills the space as workers begin placing final touches, candlesticks, platters, a bowl of apples that will definitely be stolen by nightfall. You step back and admire the result. It's still rough. Still new. But the bones of the Great Hall are in place. It's warmish. It echoes less. And for the first time, it actually looks like somewhere people might want to be. Or argue in. Or be judged publicly. Dinner that night is served here as a trial run. The food is basic, bread, broth, one suspicious meat pie, but eaten with pride under stone arches and candlelight. Even the Lord seems momentarily pleased, sitting in his enormous chair like a king whose roof no longer leaks. You fall asleep on a bench, the scent of rushes in your nose and the sound of quiet laughter echoing through the newly finished hall. You dream of long tables filled with food, chandeliers that never drip wax, and walls that finally feel like home. You're awoken before dawn by bells. Not the usual clanging iron things that mean, get to work, or, fire, or, where's my ox, but a softer, echoing chime, a monk's bell. Today, your hands won't just be building walls or hauling wood. Today, they'll carve beauty into stone. Welcome to the castle's chapel, a place for prayer, for awe, and for far too many people muttering Latin under their breath. You arrive to find the site unusually clean. Someone swept. The mortar buckets have been moved. A single candle flickers at the altar. This small stone room, barely wide enough to fit a dozen people, already carries that strange, reverent stillness, like it knows something you don't. Your first task, stone carving. You're not sculpting saints or angels, don't get excited. You're shaping blocks for corbels, the squat supports that jut from the wall and hold up beams, arches, or in this case, small decorative ledges where someone might someday place a vase, a reliquary, or a slightly aggressive pigeon. The monk overseeing the project is named Brother Aldrich. He speaks softly, walks silently, and has the unnerving habit of appearing directly behind you. He gestures toward your first block and hands you a chisel. Try a rose, he says. Simple. Gentle. You try. What emerges is less rose and more crumpled cabbage, but Brother Aldrich nods anyway. God sees effort, he says. You move on to a face, nothing too grand, just a solemn expression framed in curls. You try to capture something spiritual. What you get looks mildly suspicious, as though the statue disapproves of your hair. Outside, a team of masons sets the final stones into the chapel's arch. You help lift one, a wedge-shaped block for the top of the doorway. It slots in perfectly. The arch is delicate, pointed, Gothic, and so carefully aligned it looks like it's holding its breath. Historians still argue how much input clergy had in castle chapel design, whether monks dictated aesthetics or masons just guessed what looked holy. Brother Aldrich doesn't dictate so much as gently hum until you do what he wanted anyway. After morning prayers, which you awkwardly shuffle through, you help carry in the altar stone. It's smooth, cool, and surprisingly plain, no gold, no jewels, just limestone and reverence. You place it carefully atop two carved supports. Brother Aldrich says a short blessing in Latin. You understand none of it but bow your head all the same. Then, paint. A traveling artist has arrived, lugging a bundle of brushes, sacks of colored powders, and an expression that says, "I do not sleep." His name is Etienne. He examines the chapel walls, clicks his tongue, and says, "We'll start with vines. Maybe stars." You grind pigments with him, red from clay, green from malachite, blue from crushed glass and a wish. The artist mixes them with egg yolk and water, creating a viscous paint that smells faintly of breakfast and divine purpose. You help stencil vines up one wall, leaves curling around a window arch. Etienne adjusts your brush hand mid-stroke. "No fear," he says. "This is for the eyes of God." You're not sure God appreciates shaky line work, but you do your best. As the sun filters through the high slit window, it illuminates specks of gold dust in the air. Everything glows. Even the crumpled cabbage rose looks noble. You step outside for air and catch the sound of chanting. A group of monks has gathered under the eaves to practice plainsong. Their voices rise like mist, slow, even, echoing off the stone in layers. You close your eyes and let the sound settle into your chest. Inside, you help hang the chapel bell. It's small, just enough to call for prayer, but its ring is clear, pure, and somehow colder than metal should be. You test it once, softly. It echoes longer than seems natural. Even the frogs outside pause. Later, you carve a final detail above the chapel door, a simple cross surrounded by curling lines. Not perfect, not even especially symmetrical, but yours. Brother Aldrich pats your shoulder. The Lord appreciates earnest chisel work. Etienne is now painting stars across the ceiling. He insists you lie on the chapel floor and look up. You do. The stars swirl slightly, a spiral of gold on a blue sky. You feel dizzy. You feel calm. That evening, the first service is held. The Lord and Lady attend. So do their guards, their steward, and a small dog that no one bothers to remove. Candles flicker. Votive smoke rises. The room hums with soft voices and candlelight. The chapel is not grand. But it's whole. And it holds something bigger than stone now. After the service, you help extinguish the candles. One by one. Softly. You leave the chapel in silence, stars still painted in your mind, the scent of beeswax on your fingers, and the whisper of chants trailing behind you like the edge of a dream. Your hands are still sore from carving angel faces, and your brain is full of vines and gold stars, but today's task is a little less poetic. You are now reinforcing doors with iron, narrowing windows into arrow loops, and helping install something charmingly known as a murder hole. Back to the castle's less holy priorities, defense. You begin at the main gatehouse, the most vulnerable, and heavily fortified, part of the structure. 2 thick oak doors already stand in place, but today you're helping to bolt massive iron bands across them. These straps keep the wood from warping, cracking, or bursting open when hit with a battering ram. You hold the iron in place while the blacksmith's apprentice hammers in heavy nails the size of your fingers. The blacksmith, sweaty, scowling, and clearly delighted, shouts over the din, "Make it sing." And it does. Each hammer strike rings through the stone corridor like a battle cry in a key of pain. You pause to wipe sweat from your face and admire the door. It looks like something that could hold back an army, or at least a very persistent goat. Next, you head upstairs to help with arrow loops, the narrow vertical slits carved into the castle walls. These aren't just windows for folks with very poor taste in views. They're precision weapons. From inside, an archer can fire down at invaders with minimal exposure. From outside, all you see is a thin crack in the stone. You help widen one of the existing slits, carving the interior into a wide cone so the archer has more lateral movement. "Think of it like a funnel," says the mason. "But for arrows, not soup." He laughs at his own joke. You pretend you've never heard that exact line 4 times today. Historians still argue whether arrow loops were standard defensive elements from the beginning or gradually added as warfare changed. Some castles didn't bother. Others stuffed them into every possible surface. This castle seems to be of the "stuff them everywhere" variety. The view through the arrow loop is oddly beautiful, fields and sky framed like a painting. You take a breath. Then nearly fall out of the wall when a pigeon flies by too close. After a brief lunch of dried fish and hard bread, aka medieval jaw workout, you're asked to assist with something more ominous, the murder hole. This delightful feature is located in the ceiling above the main gate passage. If invaders ever breached the outer doors, this little opening would allow defenders to drop rocks, boiling water, sand, or worse down onto their heads. It's less defensive strategy and more medieval hospitality. Your job: help widen the hole and install a stone rim so it doesn't crumble with use. You climb a narrow stair into the wall's interior, wedge yourself between 2 beams, and peer down through the hole. It's a long drop. Below, a mason waves. "Don't drop anything on me," he shouts. You find a pebble and drop it. It lands next to him. He gives you a look. You shrug. Testing accuracy. Once the rim is set, you help install a trapdoor mechanism to cover the hole when not in use. It's made of thick wood, held in place by iron brackets and a simple pulley. You tug the rope. The trapdoor opens. You tug again. It slams shut. Satisfying. Nearby, work continues on machicolations, overhanging stone balconies with gaps in the floor. More things to drop things through. You watch masons slot them into place high above the outer wall, each one supported by carefully carved corbels. The effect is like the castle has grown its own row of stone teeth. By now the sun is dipping. You finish the day in the armory, helping stack freshly forged bolts and spears in tidy rows. The weapons glint in the torchlight. They're practical. Cold. Beautiful in a sharp, threatening way. As you stack the last bundle of arrows, you glance out a window slit and watch the courtyard darken. The walls you helped build. The scaffolds you nearly fell from. The chapel you carved a lopsided rose into. And now, doors that could hold back an army and holes meant for precisely the opposite. There's peace in that, strangely. You dine with the masons and guards, who argue about whether boiling sand or lime works better in a siege. Someone suggests both, mixed together. You decide not to sit near him tomorrow. You sleep with the sound of iron hammering still ringing in your ears, dreams filled with flaming arrows and stone mouths in the walls that whisper, "Come closer." And always, just above the door, the little hole, waiting. You knew something was off the moment you arrived at the site. No shouting. No hammers clanging. No goats chewing rope in protest. Just the quiet murmur of people talking in small groups, eyes darting, arms folded, voices pitched low. You're not building walls today. You've stumbled into something far more dangerous, guild politics. That's right. It's time to meet the Medieval Workers' Guild, a collection of masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, and every other trade that makes the castle rise. Think of it as a union. But instead of formal applications and secret ballots, you get oaths, gossip, and the occasional bloodletting, figurative, mostly. Your job today is simple: get accepted into the guild. Easier said than done. You're pulled aside by a senior mason who eyes your tunic, your boots, and the quality of your calluses. He grunts. You're not from around here, are you? You are, in fact, from one village over. Apparently, that counts as suspicious. Still, you're led to the guild shed, a dim, smoky building that smells like sweat and baked onions. Inside, men sit on benches carved with initials, symbols, and at least one crude drawing of a chicken in a helmet. A few glance your way. Most ignore you. You're introduced to the guild warden, a large man with hands like bricks and a beard that's older than the scaffolding. "Show me your tool," he says flatly. You fumble to present your chisel. He squints at it, taps it on the table, nods. Step 1 complete. Now comes the test. They bring out a stone cube and a set of iron calipers. Your task: carve a beveled edge, smooth and even, without cracking the stone or taking off a fingertip. You try not to panic. You've done this before, but not with a dozen skeptical craftsmen watching like hawks with hangovers. You begin. Chisel. Brush. Turn. Chisel again. The stone flakes obediently. You hear someone behind you mutter, "Decent grip." You allow yourself a smirk. Then someone else asks, "Where'd you train?" You freeze. Because the answer is, nowhere official. You learned by copying others, borrowing tools, and not dying. You mumble something about hands-on experience. A few raise eyebrows. One laughs. A natural, dangerous kind. Historians still argue how rigid guild structures were. Some say they were merit-based. Others argue they were territorial and exclusionary. Today, it's looking like a bit of both. You're competent, but you're not one of them yet. The warden inspects your finished edge. He runs his thumb along the bevel. Grunts again. Then announces, "Not bad." That's the medieval equivalent of a standing ovation. Now comes the awkward part, dues. You're told there's a fee. Of course. It's a hefty handful of silver. You only have half. Maybe you could owe it, you suggest. Someone chuckles darkly. Or maybe you carry rocks for a week. You agree to carry rocks. Suddenly, the guild's mood shifts. You've been sort of accepted. Enough to be tolerated, not enough to borrow tools without asking. One man claps you on the back. Another asks if you're related to that guy who dropped a beam last week. You pretend not to hear. You spend the rest of the day hauling blocks for guild members. Personal projects. A storage hut. An ornamental gate. One man has you lug stones to his mother-in-law's house. She feeds you stew. You forgive him. In between trips, you overhear conversations. A carpenter whispering that the blacksmith's apprentices are sneaking iron off-site. A mason complaining that the steward favors outsiders. Someone speculating whether the Lord will switch to foreign stone next year. It's like a medieval soap opera, but with more gravel. You also meet the apprentices. Young, muddy, eternally scolded. One's been sanding the same plank all day. Another has mortar on both knees and is chasing a chicken with a trowel. They tell you the unofficial guild motto, blame someone else and keep your boots dry. You nod. That feels right. Toward sunset, a small ceremony is held. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet gathering behind the chapel. Someone lights a lantern. The warden mutters a few words about honor, trade, and not stealing chisels. Then he hands you a strip of linen with a crude symbol stitched on it, a hammer over crossed beams. You're in, he says. Mostly. You tie it around your upper arm. It itches. That night at camp, you sit closer to the fire than usual. Someone passes you ale without grumbling. Another lets you borrow a whetstone. For once, you don't feel like just another laborer. You feel like part of the system. A small cog. Slightly less squeaky. You drift off to sleep with the guild's rhythm still in your ears, whispers, bargains, laughter, and the soft scrape of stone against wood. You dream of backroom deals, carved emblems, and a chicken named Sebastian who becomes guild president. It's unclear why. But it feels just about right. Today, you are carrying pillows. Not stones. Not timber. Pillows. Silken ones, embroidered ones, ones that have never and will never touch the ground. Why? Because you've been assigned to the upper floors of the dungeon to help prepare the ladies' tower, a suite of rooms meant for nobility, comfort, and, allegedly, refined contemplation. You trudge up a spiral staircase that feels like it was designed by someone who hated knees. The steps are narrow, steep, and just slightly tilted, so each one tries to trip you out of spite. By the time you reach the top, you're out of breath and oddly resentful of anyone rich enough to live this high up. You enter a chamber washed in soft afternoon light. The ladies' solar, they call it. A private space, meant for reading, embroidery, and dramatic sighs near windows. It's nice. For a castle. There are plaster walls, unusually smooth, that someone will later paint with vines or saints. The floor has been laid with polished oak boards. The fireplace, yes, another fireplace, is already crackling, though no one seems to know who lit it. You suspect one of the kitchen girls with a flair for ambience. Your job is to help set up the furnishings. First come the chests. Heavy wooden ones with iron clasps and decorative carvings, dragged up the stairs by 4 grumbling men and a rope that groans louder than they do. One chest nearly tips. You catch it. Barely. No one thanks you, but someone does say, "That's going in the song." Then come the hangings. These are thick fabrics, more tapestry than curtain, intended to soften the stone and show off the lady's wealth. You help hammer iron hooks into the wall, careful not to chip the plaster. A servant hands you a cloth embroidered with golden birds. You blink. It's the softest thing you've touched since this project began. A chair is brought in, gilded, high-backed, and entirely impractical. You watch 2 men try to wedge it through the doorway sideways while a third offers supervision from a safe distance. They make it. Eventually. Historians still argue whether upper chambers were truly private or merely symbolic, spaces for display more than seclusion. Judging by the number of servants going in and out of this room, privacy seems aspirational. You help install a canopy bed, for tall posts, hung with crimson drapes, topped with carved finials shaped like acorns. You're told the bed is stuffed with wool, straw, and a touch of lavender. You are also told never to sit on it. A small writing table is carried in, along with a polished brass mirror. You glimpse your face for the first time in weeks. You look like someone who lost a fight with a chimney, but the cheekbones aren't bad. Then, the lady herself arrives. She sweeps into the room like a breeze wrapped in silk. She inspects everything with quiet focus. Runs a hand over the bed curtain. Nods at the fireplace. Frowns at the height of the chair. "Raise it," she says. "I want to see out the window." You help slide it over a small wooden platform. She sits. Looks out. She says. "It'll do." Then she turns and leaves. The room falls quiet again, save for the crackle of fire and the faint rustling of embroidered birds on the wall. After she departs, the steward arrives with a list, more cushions, a second candle stand, a prayer book stand, a small chest for jewelry, and, curiously, a latch for the door that locks from the inside. You help install it, and try not to wonder what it's meant to keep out. By mid-afternoon, you're adjusting the placement of rugs. They're not thick enough to warm the floor entirely, but they help. One is dyed deep blue with little gold stars. Another has a pattern that looks suspiciously like the castle floor plan. You ask. A servant shrugs. It's fashionable. You pause to take in the room as it stands now, warm light, soft fabrics, carved oak and polished brass. It's the opposite of everything you've worked on so far. Not built for battle, but for retreat. Not strength, comfort. You step to the window, now framed in linen and lavender. The view stretches past the outer walls, over the moat, into the fields beyond. You can see workers hauling wood. Smoke curling from the bakery. Children chasing a hoop in the courtyard. You almost forget the stone under your boots. Dinner is quiet tonight. You sit with a few of the other workers from the upper floors, carpenters mostly, and one painter with blue pigment smeared across his eyelids. You talk about fabric. Thread count. Whether the fireplace tiles should have a border of leaves or lions. No one laughs. You all care now. That night, you sleep near the wall fire, dreaming of soft cushions, tapestries that murmur, and staircases that spiral towards something quieter than war. The castle is nearly finished, but not really. You know this because everyone keeps arguing. Loudly. Passionately. Constantly. Today's job isn't building something from scratch. It's finishing what's already there, aligning final stones, sanding rough beams, and more than anything, settling fresh arguments. You start in the East Tower, where a nobleman has decided the spiral staircase feels a bit too aggressive. You stare at the same narrow, turning stair you've walked for months. Aggressive? Sure, it bites your knees and tries to throw you off balance if you're not careful, but that's just called medieval charm. The solution? Add a handrail. So you help carve brackets and mount a rail from smoothed oak. You test it. It wobbles. You brace it. It squeaks. The nobleman tries it once and says, "Much better." You mutter something about stairs not having feelings. Next stop, the great hall ceiling. The painters are back, and they're unhappy. The pigments look washed out, the surface is too porous, and someone claims the stars you painted weeks ago have a slightly smug energy. You offer to repaint them. They say no. They just want to complain. A sculptor arrives to mount gargoyles. Big ones. Ugly ones. Beautiful in their grotesqueness. One has a frog's body and a wolf's head. Another appears to be vomiting fish. It keeps the demons out, the sculptor insists. You ask if demons are particularly sensitive to amphibians. He doesn't answer. You help hoist one up to a corner parapet, slot it into place, and mortar it in. It's watching the eastern sky now, frozen in eternal mid-hurl. Somehow, it makes you feel safer. Then you're called to the kitchen chimney, which is smoking in all the wrong places. The cook is furious. "My pies smell like mortar," she cries. You climb onto the roof to check the flue. Turns out, a bird built a nest in the vent. You gently remove it, no eggs, thankfully, and patch the gap. The next pie smells only vaguely like soot. Historians still argue whether finishing touches were planned from the beginning or added haphazardly. Today's experience feels firmly haphazard. Every lord, lady, steward, and cook has an opinion, and every one of them is urgent. You're summoned to the chapel next, yes, again. Someone wants a new mural behind the altar. A saint holding a lamb. No, wait. A lion. Or a swan. Or all three. You sketch a few outlines in charcoal while the steward stands behind you breathing like indecision incarnate. Eventually, they settle on, just stars. You paint stars. Then there's the gatehouse bell. It hangs wrong. You help remount it with stronger brackets and test it with a sharp tug. The sound echoes across the courtyard, clear and commanding. A few pigeons scatter. The guards cheer. The bell is good. Until a visiting lord says it's too cheerful. He wants a deeper tone. You suggest lowering it an octave. You're joking. He's not. You end up wrapping cloth around the clapper to soften the mood. It rings again, less cheer, more dread. He smiles. Perfect. And then, weather vanes. 3 of them. One shaped like a dragon, one like a boar, and one that is, frankly, just a very enthusiastic turnip. Each noble wants their own vane atop their designated tower. The carpenter mutters, they'll never spin straight. You nod. But up they go, creaking, gleaming, and already arguing with the wind. In the courtyard, the masons are polishing the main archway, chipping off rough mortar, smoothing the final seams. A boy tries to sell them a bag of blessed sand. They buy it anyway. Superstition trumps logic when you're this close to the finish line. A painter is detailing the Lord's crest above the main gate. Midway through, the Lord changes his mind, more gold. Less snake. You don't ask. You spend your last hour in the lady's solar, moving her chair precisely 6 inches to the left. She tries it. Nods. Better. Then gestures for you to move it back. Actually, no. I was wrong. You move it back. As the sun begins to set, the castle shimmers with almost completion. Flags flutter from towers. Candles glow in windows. The smell of roasted meat drifts from the kitchen. But beneath it all, the work is still happening, silent hands polishing, adjusting, fixing the final details no one will ever thank you for. You stand in the center of the courtyard and breathe. The dungeon towers above. The chapel bell rings. A gargoyle glares at the twilight. And then the master mason walks past and mutters, "We'll need 1 more year to perfect the vault." You laugh. Not because it's funny. But because, of course. 1 more year. Always. You walk back to camp, shoulders sore, hands stained with lime, head full of stars and dragons and weather vanes that don't spin. You fall asleep wondering what perfection looks like. And whether it ever actually arrives. It's done. Well, not done, but done enough that you're sleeping inside stone walls now. No more tents flapping in the wind. No more straw mats beside fire pits. Tonight, you're curled in a corner of the castle's interior, wrapped in 2 cloaks and a vague sense of triumph, watching the torchlight flicker against finished walls. But it's also winter. And winter inside a newly built castle is a lesson in humble expectations. The wind finds every crack. The hearth in the great hall burns constantly, but the heat never quite reaches your side of the room. Your breath fogs in the air. Somewhere near the chapel, you swear you can hear icicles forming in real time. You wake up to frost on your boots. On the inside of your boots. Outside, snow coats the courtyard in powdery silence. It's beautiful. Also slippery. You watch a young knight attempt to strut across the yard and wipe out spectacularly in front of 3 chickens and a disapproving cat. The Lord, of course, is cozy in his solar. 2 fireplaces, wool hangings, and a fur cloak large enough to sleep in. He inspects his new stained glass window and declares it inspiring. You, meanwhile, are chipping ice from a water barrel with a hammer. Your job today: seal drafts. Every window slit, every arrow loop, every door that wasn't quite squared when you hung it in September is now letting in air so cold it feels like a ghost has opinions. You work with rags, moss, clay, anything to plug the leaks. One guard has taken to sleeping with a chicken under his cloak. For warmth, allegedly. You help rehang a door in the dungeon. The hinges groan like a dying ox, and the wind whistles through the stone frame like it's trying to join the choir. You hammer in a fresh plank, add another fur pelt over the opening, and brace it with a bench. It helps. Slightly. Historians still argue whether castles were actually meant to be livable year-round or just symbolic fortresses. Right now, this one feels more like a very pretty stone refrigerator. In the kitchen, the cook is furious. The stew keeps freezing in the serving bowls. You help build a makeshift chimney hood over the fire, and she rewards you with the hottest, saltiest soup you've ever eaten. It tastes like triumphant boiled onion. Later, you help set up sleeping quarters in one of the side towers. Blankets, straw-stuffed mattresses, wooden frames that creak when you breathe near them. A steward insists the bedding be fluffed, for presentation. You point out that no one's going to see it under 6 layers of cloaks. He says, fluff it anyway. You fluff. The upper floors are even colder. One of the ladies faints from the draft. A priest tries to bless the wind away. A guard tries to block it with a tapestry and ends up wrapped in it like a very apologetic burrito. Back downstairs, you help test the water supply. The well is deep, icy, and the bucket rope has frozen stiff. You heat the winch with coals, crank it slowly, and listen as water sloshes below. Success. Cold success. But success. Dinner is quieter now, fewer jokes, more huddling. People eat with one hand and keep the other tucked inside their tunics. Someone plays a lute, but the strings are brittle and snap halfway through a love song. No one minds. You pass by the chapel on the way to your bunk and hear singing. Soft, clear, layered voices echoing through cold stone. The monks have gathered to sing in the warmth of their breath alone. It's the most beautiful thing you've ever heard, and it makes the castle feel whole in a way fire never could. That night, you curl on a low cot beside the hearth. Your cloak smells like ash and plaster. You can hear the wind scratching at the shutters. The fire pops. Guster the castle dog snores softly from under the table. You fall asleep to the creak of timbers, the distant howling of wolves, and the odd comfort of knowing that even unfinished, even frozen, even full of mice and questionable mattresses, the castle holds. And so do you. The drums start at dawn. You jolt awake in your bunk, disoriented, blinking through the haze of half-sleep and half-frozen breath. Then you remember, it's celebration day. The castle is being officially declared complete. Which, of course, it isn't. But that hasn't stopped the banners from going up and the musicians from tuning their lutes like they're preparing for war. You scramble into your tunic, toss on your cleanest, least muddy, boots, and head to the courtyard where preparations are already chaotic. Nobles are arriving. Flags flap from every tower. Smoke curls from every chimney. And someone's yelling about where the good cheese went. You're assigned to help set up the banquet. Not attend, don't be silly. Help. First, you carry benches into the great hall. They've been polished to within an inch of their lives. You slip on a waxy patch and nearly become the day's first injury. 2 stewards laugh. You do not. Then it's on to torches, braziers, candles, anything that can burn and make light. The hall is to glow, like the gates of heaven, says the cook, who is sweating through his apron and threatening death over undercooked pigeon pies. The lord arrives mid-morning, clad in a velvet cloak so enormous it requires its own breeze. He walks the length of the hall, inspecting every tapestry, every plate, every candle height. He nods. Once. It's the equivalent of fireworks. You help guide a minstrel troupe to their corner of the hall, 3 lutenists, 1 bagpiper, and a man whose sole job appears to be jingling bells tied to his elbows. He jingles at you in greeting. You nod, unsure of the etiquette. Outside, knights assemble. Their armor shines, their horses are restless, and someone is painting heraldry onto shields with a brush far too small. It takes you 10 minutes to realize one of the knights is actually the steward's cousin in borrowed gear. No one questions it. In the afternoon, the castle doors are thrown wide. Trumpets blare. Guests arrive from surrounding manors, lords, ladies, merchants, and at least one person clearly just here for the food. The tables groan under the weight of bread, fruit, wine, roast birds, and one alarming fish sculpture with a lemon slice for an eye. You're stationed discreetly in the shadows, refilling jugs, adjusting seating, and whispering urgent translations when the local dialects get too confusing. One noble asks if the gargoyles bite. You assure him they only nibble. The castle gleams. For once, it smells not of mortar and sweat, but rosemary, roasted meats, beeswax, and wildflowers. The rushes on the floor are fresh. The tapestries hang straight. Even the draft through the north window seems to have agreed to behave for the day. Historians still argue whether such celebrations were truly joyful or simply performative. Watching the feast unfold, you suspect both. There's laughter, yes, but also tension. Nobles test each other's smiles. Alliances shift with the pouring of wine. Every toast feels like a wager. Midway through the meal, a bard recites a poem about the castle's construction. It's generous with the truth. According to him, the walls were raised in harmony, the scaffolds danced in unison, and the workers sang with joy. You make a mental note to one day write your own version, complete with mudslides, bruised egos, and one guy falling into the moat. Outside, tournaments begin. Archery contests. Swordplay. A mock siege that ends with a man in a barrel rolling down a hill and being declared hero of the realm. Children run around with wooden swords, smacking each other and yelling, "Surrender or eat stew." You take a moment to stand alone atop the outer wall, away from the bustle. The view stretches for miles. Forests, fields. Rivers. Roads you helped carve stones for. A castle you helped lift from the earth with your own calloused hands. It hits you, then, you built this. Not just the walls or the towers or the funny-shaped arch in the chapel. But the feel of it. The heartbeat. The way the stone warms in the afternoon sun. The way wind curls through the arrow loops. The echo of laughter in the great hall. This castle works. It lives. And then a pigeon poops on your sleeve. Which feels fair. As night falls, the torches are lit. The music swells. Couples dance beneath garlands. A group of knights start a game involving dice, dares, and someone's helmet. You quietly back away. The Lord makes a final toast. To the hands that built this fortress, he says. Everyone claps. A few even glance toward the servants and laborers lining the edges. You nod, just once. It's enough. Later, when the crowd thins and the wine has slowed to a trickle, you help gather dishes, extinguish candles, and tuck the great hall back into itself. The tapestries sway gently. The floor is littered with crumbs, laughter, and crumpled napkins. You return to your corner bunk, stretch out beside the still warm hearth, and let your eyes close slowly. You dream of feasts with no dishes. Walls that build themselves. And a castle where, just for one night, everything worked as it should. It's been 20 years. You return on a gray morning, boots crunching over the frozen path that leads to the outer gate. The fields are bare. The trees have grown older and thinner. And before you, Looming above the hill like a memory carved in stone, stands the castle you once helped build. Or, what's left of it. The walls still rise tall, proud against the sky, but look closely, and you'll see the mortar cracking. Hairline fractures crawl across the joints like ancient veins. A corner of the curtain wall is missing a few stones, probably weather, possibly goats. Time has been busy. The moat? Dry. What was once a silvery ribbon around the base of the walls is now a trench full of weeds, abandoned tools, and the skeletal remains of what may have once been a wheelbarrow. One brave frog still lives there. You nod in respect. Inside, things are both familiar and not. The great hall, where you once painted stars and spilled soup, is now dim, its tapestries faded, the rushes long gone. One of the chandeliers hangs slightly crooked. There's a scorch mark near the fireplace. A crack splits the southern wall from ceiling to floor. But the air still holds something, warm. Lived in. You walk the halls slowly, your fingertips brushing the stone. There's your crooked arch. There's the chapel with your cabbage-shaped rose carving, still nestled above the door. There's even Guster, the castle dog, well, his grandson, probably, snoring under a bench, same spot as ever. You peek into the ladies' tower. It's quieter now. The drapes are gone. The bedposts are dusty. But the chair by the window is still there, positioned just so. You sit, just for a minute, and look out. And realize, you remember the view. Exactly. You make your way up to the parapets. The wind is colder now. Stronger. One of the gargoyles is missing an ear. The dragon-shaped weather vane has rusted into place, facing perpetually west. Below, the outer gate is being repaired by a pair of young masons arguing over angles and shouting things you once shouted yourself. Historians still argue whether medieval castles were ever truly finished, or if they were always in a cycle of use, decay, and repair. Looking at this one now, you realize, it's both. The castle is still here. But it's changing. Evolving. Being lived in. That's the point. You speak with the steward, someone new, younger, with ink stains on their sleeves and a permanent expression of worry. They thank you for your past work. Offer a mug of cider. Mention a leaky roof above the chapel, and ask if you'd like to take a look. You smile. Decline. Your knees aren't what they were. You wander out to the fields before dusk. The sun hits the stone walls just right, turning them gold for a brief, perfect moment. And even with the cracks and stains and stubborn drawbridge that never quite closed properly, the castle still holds. Maybe not the way it did before. But still. You press a palm to the outer wall. Feel the warmth of the sun in the stone. Hear a voice shout from the rampart. Hear another shout back. Laughter echoes, just faintly. Someone's preparing supper. Someone's sharpening arrows. Life continues. You built this. And now, others do too. You walk away at twilight, the wind at your back, the castle behind you, not crumbling, not forgotten, but living. You don't look back. You don't need to. You lie in bed now, listening to the soft hush of your own breath, maybe a fan spinning in the corner, or the faint creak of wood settling in the walls around you. It's quiet here. Peaceful. And in your mind's eye, the castle still stands, tucked among hills, its stone walls warmed by late sunlight, the shadows deepening under each arch, every worn step familiar. The wind is gentler now. The work is done. You remember the lift of timber, the rasp of rope through your hands, the ache of days spent shaping something permanent. You see the walls you raised, the chapel you carved, the laughter by firelight, the weight of hammers and small victories. Even the frogs in the moat and that smug gargoyle still guarding the eastern wall, they're all part of it. There's something comforting about the slowness of it all. Stone by stone. Year by year. Not perfect. Never really finished. Just, enduring. And now, as you drift further into stillness, let the sounds of that place fade gently. The clink of chisels, the rustle of straw, the distant bells, let them soften into nothing. There's no need to hold on to anything. You've done enough. You've built something. You've walked its halls, watched it rise, felt it breathe. And now, with the moon over the ramparts, and the stars reflecting in the chapel glass, it's time to rest. Let the castle keep watch tonight. Sleep well.